What's up, everybody? We're gonna go ahead and talk about Chiron conjunct Algol and the archetype of sacred violence, the wound of the Gorgon. So this thesis investigates whether a precise conjunction between Chiron and the fixed star Algol, Beta Persei, correlates with a distinct and identifiable class of wounds centered on the head, neck, feminine rage, and the dynamics of victimhood and empowerment. Drawing upon mythological analysis, case study evidence, and comparative astrological methodology, this essay argues that the Chiron-Algol conjunction produces a wound profile qualitatively different from a mere sign-based alignment, where a sign-based relationship suggests a diffuse thematic resonance. The conjunction represents a fusion of archetypal energies, the wounded healer, Chiron, merged with the severed Gorgon, Algol, creating a specific psychosomatic signature, trauma localized in the throat or cranium, wounds stemming from feminine betrayal or outrage, and a peculiar gift for transmuting victimization into protective power. This thesis posits that the conjunction operates as a distinct archetypal complex requiring synthesis of Medusa's dual nature as both a victim and a weapon. Before we get started, though, talking more in depth about this, do me a favor with peace and love, subscribe, like, comment, and share if you dare, because we care about you. Alright. The problem of specificity in fixed star analysis, Alright, so the astrological community has long acknowledged Chiron as the wounded healer, that Centaurian figure whose incurable wound became the source of his healing arts. Simultaneously, fixed star tradition has maintained an unbroken lineage regarding Algol's malefic reputation from Ptolemy through Vivian Robson to contemporary observers. Algol is consistently identified as the most evil star in the heavens, associated with decapitation, strangulation, and violence to the head. Yet the intersection of these two potent symbols remains under-theorized. The question before us is not merely whether Chiron-Algol contacts appear in charts of those with head or neck trauma, but whether this specific conjunction produces a qualitatively distinct wound signature, one that cannot be reduced to either factor alone or to a looser sign-based relationship. This thesis advances three interconnected arguments. First, that the Chiron-Algol conjunction represents a fusion of archetypes rather than a simple additive combination. Second, that this fusion manifests in identifiable patterns of physical and psychological wounding localized in the head, neck, and voice. And third, that this configuration carries a unique redemptive potential rooted in Medusa's mythological function as a apotropaic shield. Bear with me, guys. Let's talk about the archetypal components. So Chiron is the wound that teaches, right? The discovery of Chiron in 1977 coincided with what many astrologers identify as a collective awakening to the universality of psychological wounding. In myth, Chiron was a wise centaur, tutor to heroes, gifted in medicine and prophecy, yet suffering an incurable wound from a poison arrow, ironically an arrow of Heracles, his own student. The essential paradox of Chiron is that his healing power derives directly from his unhealable wound. He cannot cure himself, yet he cures others. He cannot escape pain, yet he transmutes pain into pedagogy. Astrologically, Chiron's placement by sign and house indicates the nature and location of the core wound, while aspects to Chiron reveal the pathways through which healing may be accessed. A conjunct sun suggests wounding of identity and self-expression, often linked to the father. A conjunct moon indicates trauma encoded in the emotional body, frequently tracing to the mother or early nurturing environment. These distinctions matter because they establish that Chiron's expression is fundamentally modified by whatever it contacts. Let's talk about Algol. It's the Gorgon's gaze. Algol's mythology is essential to understanding its astrological signature. The star marks the head of Medusa in the constellation Perseus, the terrifying Gorgon whose gaze turned men to stone. Yet the fuller myth reveals a tragic dimension often eluded in popular retelling. Medusa was not always a monster. She was a beautiful mortal woman, a priestess of Athena, who was raped by Poseidon in Athena's own temple. The goddess, unable to punish her uncle Poseidon, instead punished Medusa, transforming her hair to serpents and her face to such horror that no man could look upon her and live. This mythological background is critical. Medusa is doubly victimized, first by the god's violation, then by the goddess's rage, before she becomes the weapon whose severed head Athena subsequently wears upon her aegis as a protective emblem. The Gorgon's head, even in death, retains its power. It becomes the Gorgonian, the apotropaic symbol used throughout ancient Greek culture to ward off evil. As one commentator observes, Algol bestows a gift if the receiver is ready for it. It is the ability to reflect curses and send them back to their presenter. The wound becomes the shield. Part 2, we're going to look at the conjunction as fusion, distinguishing sign placement from precise contact, the argument from specificity. So a sign-based relationship between Chiron and Algol occurs when Algol's zodiacal longitude falls within the same sign as Chiron, regardless of degree proximity. So for example, if Chiron is at 20 degrees Taurus and Algol is at 26 degrees Taurus, they share a sign but are separated by 6 degrees. A conjunction, by contrast, requires proximity within a narrow orb, typically 3 through 5 degrees for fixed stars of Algol's magnitude. The distinction is not merely quantitative but qualitative. A sign-based relationship suggests a broad thematic resonance. Taurus, the sign of the throat and neck, colored by Algol's violent mythology, subtly influencing Chiron's wound expression, but the conjunction represents something different, an activation of Algol's archetype through Chiron's wound mechanism. The star is not merely ambient background radiation, but a focused beam intersecting the chart's most sensitive point of vulnerability. Let's look at the chart of Sylvia Plath, or the case of Sylvia Plath, if you will. The most extensively documented instance of this configuration appears in her natal chart. She was a poet whose Chiron formed a precise conjunction with Algol, and Plath's biography provides a compelling case study for the specific wound signature this thesis proposes. The psychological dimension is unmistakable. Plath's relationship with her mother Aurelia was famously complex and fraught. Her poem, Medusa, addressed directly to her mother, transforms the marine creature, the jellyfish, into a suffocating, paralyzing presence. I shall take no bite of your body, bottle in which I live, ghastly Vatican. The imagery of entrapment, of being bottled alive, of a presence that paralyzes rather than empowers, these resonate deeply with Medusa's petrifying gaze. The scholarly commentary notes that Algol is Medusa's winking eye, and observes the tempting conclusion that Plath's inner wound was dealt by her mother, the subject of Plath's poem Medusa. The temptation is compelling precisely because the archetypal correspondence is so exact, the feminine wound inflicted by feminine betrayal, expressing itself through imagery of the severed head and petrifying gaze. Yet, the physical dimension is equally striking. Plath's method of suicide by gas inhalation involves the throat and breath. Her final poems obsessively circle images of the throat, the voice, the difficulty of speech. Words describes echoes and reverberations from the bottom of the pool, that same pool where fixed stars govern a life from below. The suffocation, the silencing the throat as site of both expression and extinction, these are Algol's signature written upon Chiron's wound. Let's talk about the broader case evidence beyond Plath. The documented cases are striking in their consistency. Valerie Levina's blog, tracking Algol contacts over nearly 15 years, provides multiple instances where planetary conjunctions with Algol produce violent head or neck outcomes. And guys, I literally have Algol conjunct my ascendant, so what's going to happen to me? I don't know. Mariana Bridi da Costa? Yeah. So, 1988 through 2009, the Brazilian model who contracted a bacterial infection leading to septic shock and the amputation of all 4 limbs had Jupiter conjunct Algol. Jupiter, as ruler of a probable Pisces ascendant, held particular significance as a chart ruler activated by Algol's violence. Charlize Theron, the actress, suffered a severe neck injury described as almost decapitating her. Her chart shows detrimented Mars and Ketu on Algol, Mars is the planet of violence and surgery, conjoined with the lunar south node Ketu, which is associated with severance and the head in Vedic tradition, precisely on Algol. Adam Johnson, the ice hockey player whose throat was fatally cut by a skate blade in a freak accident, had Mars and Ketu on Algol, the identical configuration to Theron's near miss, here resulting in death. The Moscow lawyer buried January 23rd, 2009 after being shot in the head. His birth date of May 20th placed his son on Algol. Now these cases share a common thread. When a planet conjoins Algol, that planet's domain becomes the vehicle for head or neck wounding. Mars, violence, cuts, produces throat cutting. The Sun, vitality, identity, produces fatal head trauma. Jupiter, the body's expansion, and the chart ruler, produces systemic breakdown affecting limbs. The pattern is consistent. Algol's mythology manifests through the specific symbolism of the conjoining planet. So if it's the ascendant, I just want to take a quick break and use DeepSeek to write this out and help us go through this as well, because we can actually see, right, an essay on case studies regarding people with Algol fixed star conjunct their natal ascendant for advanced astrology school for, say, faculty. Alright, so while we wait for this to go ahead and write, I'm gonna just take a look here. It's interesting because I don't really know any celebrities that have this placement. Algol conjunct the ascendant, but I know that I have it. And Taurus is, 26 degrees or is it 25 degrees? I'm pretty sure mine is 25 degrees in my ascendant. So I'm very curious to find out what would occur in regards to someone with it conjunct their ascendant specifically. So here's what we'll do. I'll make this a new tab and then we'll go over that as well. It's pretty interesting that DeepSeek can help us come up with stuff like this. So part 3. I guess technically I could just write it in here. Alright. So we left off on part 3 of this. So part 3 is the conjunction versus sign-based contact, a proposed distinction. We talk about the statistical hypothesis. If the Chiron-Algol conjunction produces a specific wound signature, we would expect to observe this signature with greater frequency and coherence than in cases where Chiron and Algol share only a sign relationship. The following testable hypotheses emerge. So we see here we have hypothesis A, conjunction group. Natives with Chiron conjunct Algol within 3 degrees orb will demonstrate identifiable patterns of trauma or wounding localized in the head, neck, and or throat, or voice, as well as psychological wounds traceable to feminine betrayal, maternal wounding, or experiences of violation followed by punishment, as well as a subsequent capacity for protective or apotropaic functions, the ability to reflect curses or shield others from similar wounds. And hypothesis B is sign-only group. Natives with Chiron and Algol in the same sign, but outside conjunction orb will show diffuse thematic resonance, perhaps a tendency toward the sign's general wound patterns, colored by Algol's mythology, but without the concentrated biographical specificity of the conjunction group. Alright? Now we look at the theoretical rationale. Why should this distinction hold? The answer lies in the nature of fixed star influence itself. A star's longitude in the zodiac is a relatively recent construct. The ancient world understood stars through their risings, settings, and culminations, their actions rather than their positions. When a planet conjoins a fixed star within close orb, it partakes of that star's essential nature in a way that mere sign placement cannot replicate. The planet is saturated by the star's frequency. In the case of Chiron, the wound healer archetype saturation by Algol's frequency produces a specific alchemy. The wound assumes the shape of Medusa's story. The native is violated by fate, by family, by circumstance, then punished for the violation. The classic double bind of the Medusa myth, but from this wound emerges a strange gift, the capacity to turn the wound outward as protection. The severed head becomes the shield on Athena's breast. Let's talk about the Virgo-Taurus axis consideration. So Algol's current tropical longitude hovers near 26 degrees Taurus. Though precession gradually shifts this position, this places Algol naturally in relationship with the Taurus-Scorpio axes, throat and pelvis, position, and loss. And by sign rulership with Venus, a sign-based relationship between Chiron and Algol would thus be filtered through Venusian and Taurian themes. The throat as a site of wounding, the voice as an instrument of pain or healing, issues of worth and value attached to the wound. But a conjunction transcends these sign-based considerations. Whether Chiron occupies Taurus, Gemini, or any other sign at the moment of Algol contact, the proximity overrides the sign's filtering effect. The star speaks directly, not through the sign's medium. Thus, we find Chiron-Algol conjunctions in various signs, producing consistent themes of head-neck wounding and feminine betrayal, modulated but not determined by sign placement. Alright, part 4 is the redemptive trajectory from victim to Gorgonian, the healing paradox. So the most profound dimension of the Chiron-Algol conjunction lies in its redemptive potential. If Chiron teaches that the wound is the source of healing, and Algol embodies the transformation of victim into protective weapon, then their conjunction should produce individuals uniquely capable of transmuting trauma into protection for others. This is precisely what we observe in the Plath case. Though tragically unrealized in her lifetime, her poetry, those words that dry and riderless continue to circulate years after her death, functions as a Gorgonian for subsequent generations of wounded women. Her Medusa poem, which ostensibly addresses maternal betrayal, becomes a shield for readers who recognize their own entrapment. The wound, articulated, protects. One commenter on Lavina's blog articulates this possibility. Algol can be deep and evolving force. Think of the beautiful young Medusa. The feminine has been vilified for thousands of years and may be a bit pissed off. The rage properly channeled becomes protective. The severed head properly displayed wards off evil. We look at our clinical indicators. For the practicing astrologer, the following indicators may help distinguish a Chiron-Algol conjunction, requiring this specific interpretation. So degree proximity. Orbs should not exceed 3 degrees for full saturation. Wider orbs may suggest the need for additional testimonies, angularity, planetary dignity to activate. House placement. The house position indicates the life domain where the wound manifests and where the protective function may operate. Plath's Chiron-Algol in the 8th house, death, transformation, shared resources, speaks to her poetic legacy and posthumous protection of others through her art. Aspects to the conjunction. Planets aspecting the Chiron-Algol pair indicate additional dimensions. Moon aspects may intensify the maternal wound. Saturn aspects may suggest karmic or structural dimensions. Mars aspects may increase physical manifestation risk. And mythological resonance in natives' life and work. Look for Medusa imagery, decapitation themes, throat, voice issues, and patterns of feminine betrayal expressed in the native's creative output or life narrative. So we conclude with the severed head that speaks This thesis has argued that the Chiron-Algol conjunction produces a wound signature distinct from a mere sign-based relationship. Right? A signature characterized by trauma to the head, neck, or voice, psychological wounds stemming from feminine betrayal or violation, and a redemptive trajectory toward protective apotropaic function. The conjunction represents not addition but fusion. Chiron's incurable wound takes the shape of Medusa's severed head, and the native becomes potentially the bearer of the Gorgonian. The distinction between conjunction and sign-based contact is not pedantic but essential. It separates those for whom Algol remains background radiation from those for whom the star becomes a lived destiny, a destiny of wounding, yes, but also of transformation. The severed head, in the end, speaks. The silenced voice finds words, and those words, as Plath knew, govern lives from the bottom of the pool, fixed stars shining upward toward the world of the living. And now we talk about the severed head and the embodied self, case studies in Algol conjunct the ascendant, which is, I have this placement, so again, I'm very fascinated by it. Now, in the lexicon of fixed star astrology, Algol B per se stands as a pariah, known traditionally as the demon star or the head of Medusa. Its reputation has long been one of decapitation, violence, and the catastrophic undoing of the native. However, for the advanced practitioner, such literalist interpretations represent a failure to engage with the star's deeper mythos. Algol doesn't merely signify physical beheading, it signifies the ritualistic severance of the false self, the persona that one presents to the world. When the stars precisely conjunct the ascendant, the very axes of self-projection and embodiment, the individual is conscripted into a lifetime of confronting what lies beneath the mask. Through the examination of 3 distinct case studies, a revolutionary artist, a trauma survivor turned healer, and a controversial public figure, we will delineate how this placement manifests not as a curse, but as a ferocious imperative toward authenticity, forged in the crucible of crises. Oops. Really quick, before we talk about our first case study, I gotta check something out really quick. One moment, guys. I'm looking for something right now on my phone. Can't find what I'm fucking looking for. Oh my god. Alright, give me 1 second, guys. So, our first subject is a celebrated visual artist born with Algol at 26 degrees Taurus, conjunct an ascendant at 25 degrees Taurus. It presents the archetype of Algol as the creative destructive force. Now, from an early age, we see the native experience a profound sense of alienation from their physical body and social identity. We know the ascendant is the mask we wear, and with Algol affixed to it, the native's attempts to wear a conventional mask were met with relentless sabotage, both internal and external. And it's funny because I experienced this throughout my life, just relentless sabotage for being who I am by my family mainly, criticizing me, or even people online, whatever. So this individual's artistic breakthrough came following a sudden public humiliation that effectively decapitated their previous career and social standing. This event, which is a classic Algolian crisis, stripped them of their cultivated persona. Subsequently, their work became obsessively focused on themes of decapitation, the female gaze, and the petrification of the oppressor, direct iterations of the Medusa myth. The artists began creating large-scale self-portraits where their own face was severed, fragmented, or turned to stone. And for this native, the ascendant Algol conjunction did not manifest as a perpetrator of violence, but as the embodiment of the Gorgon. The head, which is the rational, socially constructed self, it was severed to unleash the primal power of the gaze, and astrologically this is crucial. So Algol is located in the constellation Perseus, held in the hand of the hero who has severed Medusa's head. But for the one with the star on the ascendant, the identification is not with Perseus, the hero who wields the power, but with Medusa herself, the chthonic pre-Olympian power that must be contained, vilified, and ultimately severed. The native's life journey became a reclamation of that severed power. The conjunction served as a forge, using crises to destroy any inauthentic structure of self, compelling the native to rebuild an identity rooted in their raw, unfiltered, creative, and feminine power. Let's talk about the second case study. And it's crazy that, people can't understand that people have these same aspects per se in their natal chart, but they're going to act out differently. All right. People are just different. So the second case study is the wound in the witness, the alchemy of the survivor. And our second case offers a more psychologically complex manifestation. A clinical therapist born with Algol at 28 degrees Taurus conjunct the ascendant, which is the first house. It endured severe early childhood trauma involving a close family member. Now, the decapitation here was literal in a metaphorical sense, the severing of the head of the family, the authority figure from his position of power through legal intervention. However, the more profound severance was the native's own childhood self from her sense of safety and identity. So in this chart, the ascendant ruler, which is Venus, right, Taurus, it was in a challenging square to Saturn, adding a layer of profound isolation and karmic weight to the self-image. The Algol conjunction, rather than making the native a victim in perpetuity, became the source of her professional vocation. She reports that from adolescence she possessed an uncanny ability to see the hidden toxicity in family systems, a piercing Medusan gaze that made others uncomfortable but allowed her to navigate her environment. I also experienced this. In fact, I'd say people with Algol, it's psychic tendencies in regards to like hidden realms of abuse or secrets, especially with the family, because it all starts at home, to be honest, with your family or your lack of family and security with the family. So, her life's work became helping others survive. Her life's work became helping other survivors of abuse decapitate their internalized oppressor. So for her, the Algol ascendant manifested as an inability to maintain a false or superficial self. Any attempt to play nice or ignore dysfunction resulted in severe psychological or somatic distress, as well as this has happened for me throughout my life. Playing nice and ignoring dysfunction in romantic relationships because it's what I saw with my mother and my father. My mom being the enabler, my father being the perpetrator. So the star's energy forced her into a path of radical honesty. This case demonstrates Algol's function as a transpersonal agent. The star's energy was not for her, but through her. The decapitation of her own childhood persona was a necessary sacrifice that allowed her to become a witness and a guide for others. The shadow risk, which she navigates through rigorous self-care, is the tendency to petrify, to become so fixed in the identity of the wounded healer that she becomes rigid and unable to evolve. All right, and now we're going to look at our third case study, and then we're going to synthesize these. So, the public decapitation, the demonized figure. So our final case is that of a public intellectual. Let's say they're born with Algol at 0 degrees Gemini and is conjunct the ascendant, with the ascendant itself at 29 degrees Taurus, a critical degree. All right? Now this native rose to prominence for challenging a dominant cultural narrative. For years, they were celebrated. Then, in a swift turn of public opinion, they became a pariah, a demonized figure. This is the most literal manifestation of the Algol mythos in the public sphere. The head of the Gorgon is displayed, turned into a weapon to terrify others, while the individual to whom the head belongs is reduced to a monstrous symbol. Now, in this chart, Mercury, the ruler of the Algol degree, was in a hard aspect to Pluto, indicating the potential for words and ideas to become vehicles of destruction and power. The conjunction on the ascendant meant that their very presence, their way of being in the world, became the flashpoint for collective shadow projection. Their public decapitation was a ritualistic scapegoating, a process where a group severs and projects its unwanted aspects onto a single individual. All right? Sounds like me with this transgenderism bullshit and a lot of the other detransitioners that we're going to see. So for the native, the post-decapitation phase became a profound spiritual ordeal. Stripped of their professional identity and public persona, the head, they were forced to confront the self without external validation. This case illustrates the collective function of an Algol ascendant. Such individuals often serve as lightning rods for the culture's shadow. The star's power is not just personal, it is archetypal. The native is chosen or chooses through unconscious alignment to embody the severed, the monstrous, and the taboo, forcing the collective to confront what it has cast out. The advanced astrological lens sees this not as mere tragedy, but as a sacrificial role that, if consciously integrated, can lead to a form of wisdom unattainable through conventional success. All right? And we synthesize beyond the demon star. So across these three cases, we see a coherent pattern emerge that moves beyond the simplistic fatalism associated with Algol. The conjunction to the ascendant consistently correlates with these four things. The first thing is a crisis of persona. The individual's initial socially conditioned identity is decapitated through a significant crisis, often involving public humiliation, betrayal, or trauma, or all of the above. This is not an optional event, but a thematic necessity of the star's activation. As well as the Gorgon's gaze, the native possesses a penetrating, often unsettling ability to see through facades, to petrify falsehood. This can be a source of power and alienation. Learning to consciously wield this gaze as an artist, healer, or truth teller is a key developmental task. Embodiment of the shadow, these individuals are often forced, either by personal destiny or collective projection, to embody the disowned aspects of their family or culture. They become the scapegoat or the monstrous feminine, carrying the burden of what others refuse to see. In the necessity of severance, the decapitation is a sacred, albeit brutal, act of initiation. It severs the native from inauthentic structures, false power, and superficial identity. The life path is one of radical authenticity, where the price of inauthenticity is existential collapse, i.e. transgenderism and medicalization. All right, thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one with peace and love, teaching you more.